Hi, guys. Welcome to this episode of the Embryo Advocates podcast. Today, I am joined by Abby Gillmore, who is actually my former boss. So, Abby and I used to work together at a pro-life organization, and Abby was running both development and marketing at this organization. And we knew each other because I was volunteering as a photographer for the organization, and then eventually I reported to her. So I've learned a lot from Abby and I admire her pro-life journey. And I'm super excited to get to ask her questions about how she decided to devote so much of her time and life to the pro-life cause because it is controversial and it can take a lot of courage to stand up for the unborn and to devote your career to doing that for many years, like Abby did. So, Abby, welcome to the podcast and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Cassidy.
Of course. So I wanted to ask you what drove you originally to be involved with the pro-life cause? Because people have different reasons, right? Like have a family member that has an experience with abortion. Some people see abortion victim photography. So what was your very first exposure to abortion, and were you ever pro-choice?
No, I was never pro-choice. I don't know if that would be possible in my immediate family. I grew up in a kind of a mixed home. My mom was extremely pro-life and my dad was pro-choice. But I think my mom's pro-life views so far surpassed his that it just seemed almost like factual to me that abortion was wrong. Um, Yeah, I when I was younger, there was a Planned Parenthood actually being built a few towns over. We lived in the suburbs of Chicago, and there was this big mega center that they were building in Aurora, Illinois. And so my mom and I actually went and protested a bunch during the period of time before they started construction. I remember there were some other pro-life leaders there that were really taking ownership and taking leadership in even these Jericho marches where we would march around the block like 7 times and pray many, many prayers for the stopping of that abortion facility to be opened. Unfortunately, it did open, so that was a huge loss, both to the pro-life movement and obviously to who knows how many lives at this rate. But yeah, I just remember being in a lot of ways engaged in different pro-life activities growing up at through church events, through the one I just mentioned. And then I also had really pro-life aunts in particular. My mom's from a really large family. She's one of 15 children,
Wow.
and two of them are adopted. And they had foster children. My grandmother babysat growing up, so they just were extremely open to life in a really particular way. But a few of my aunts were involved in some rescues back in the 90s and have a fun rap sheet of arrests from that period. But then also, one in particular is my mom's twin, actually. So she's probably the closest aunt to me. She was a sidewalk counselor for decades, and she literally spent 30 hours a week sidewalk counseling for a long time. So I think seeing that legacy in front of me just made it so evident that, abortion was wrong, that this was clearly, something to be opposed to, but then also, how to advocate and actually be engaged in helping moms and women and all of that. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And how old were you when you were hearing about, your aunts are going to jail for the
Well, they went to jail before I was born, so I didn't know of any of that. But I do remember hearing my mom she told me about that very so casually. I don't remember when I heard that. I think I was probably in middle or high school.
Mhm.
But just, that there was always a family that my mom's extended family was helping out, or there was always a mom in crisis that they were getting resources for. That was just I can't remember a time where that was the first time because it was just so evident for my whole childhood that it was just kind of what people did. So,
Right.
yeah.
And had you decided at that middle school or high school age that someday you were going to do a rescue?
No, not at all. That was not on my radar whatsoever.
So what was the story of that? Because eventually you did. You
Yeah,
met Monica Miller, I assume,
we
and then
did.
you were a part
Yeah.
of a rescue.
Right. That was, I mean, gosh, that was like a few years into my pro-life activity. So I feel like that story is long, but yeah, I did meet Monica Miller. I really, it's kind of a long story, but I in high school studied abroad for a little while, which is pretty atypical in high school. And then my senior year came back from that and went to a new school, and I just had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that having been abroad, I wanted to do something that served others. And at the time, I was thinking like, oh, I'll go be a missionary and help orphans in some Spanish-speaking country because I'm fluent in Spanish after, having spent 5 months in Costa Rica, whatever. And so that was like what I was convinced I was going to do. I had no knowledge of what I would do if I should get a degree or any sort of career. It just didn't feel right, but it did make sense to me that like some sort of mission was what my next step would be. So in that senior year, I met Monica Miller, and she gave a talk. At the time we were living in Indianapolis. So she came to Indianapolis to give a talk for the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And she, in this talk, said something along the lines of like, we're not fighting ignorance in the pro-life movement, we're fighting apathy. And when radical apathy abounds, radical love is the only solution. And it really resonated with me. But then I was like just glued to this talk. And at the time, I'd been like searching and searching for months of what to do next. And so this was like such a huge thing, but she stops her talk and she said, "I just have a sense that someone in the audience, your life is about to take a radical change, and it's about to take a big change." And I went up to her after the talk and I was like, "I'm for sure, I know that you're talking to me." And so we like exchanged, phone numbers or emails or whatever. She gave me her book, whatever, and I didn't see her again. And months later, I had applied to be a missionary for a pro-life organization. And there was like some weird issue with like they lost my email or whatever. But Monica Miller had actually talked to the head of this organization and said, "Hey, did that girl apply? Because I really think you should take her." And it ended up being that I got in contact with them very last minute before this internship was supposed to start. And they said, like, our internship is closed, but Monica Miller actually named you specifically that we should take you. And so we're going to reopen this for you. And like 2 weeks later, I found myself as a pro-life missionary. So then after that period, decided, like, I really feel like I'm called to organizational leadership in the pro-life movement. I want to have like a decent basis on how to do that well. So I did decide, like, okay, I'm gonna go to college and get a degree. And while I was in college, Monica Miller started again, well, I guess rescues had been going on for a long time, but they had kind of ended due to the FACE Act, so it became a federal offense to block the doors of abortion facilities, and so that ended a lot of the movement in the 90s and early 2000s, but they wanted to try a new strategy where we would actually go in the facility and not block anything, but try to talk to the women and men inside. But then also, when asked to leave, we would practice passive resistance like they did in the civil rights movement, to, basically delay as long as possible any abortions being able to happen. But we would not specifically block the doors. So they didn't know if we would be charged with a felony, but they wanted to try it. And Monica Miller reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to do it. And yeah, I considered it. I was in college. It just seemed like, I don't know, maybe I was like, I was like, sure, I don't have anything going on, like I don't know that I even really thought about it like long term. I was just like, okay. Because like, it's not really an everyday experience that you get asked to do something like that. And I don't know at the time that I even really like knew that I would be arrested. I don't know, but yeah, so it was a long time coming. I was a few years in by that point.
Mhm. That's amazing because you're this young, activist, you're passionate, and you know God is leading you somewhere in this pro-life journey. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Yeah, you're drawn towards organizational leadership and you've gone to this internship, you've met Dr. Miller. That's just, like a lot of little ingredients right there. You're like, I don't know exactly what God
Yeah,
is doing, like what's he making out of this, but here
right.
you are. now going into an abortion clinic. So what abortion clinic was this rescue at?
Yeah, so we were at the Northland Family Planning Clinic, and that was in Sterling Heights, Michigan. And so at the time I lived in Indianapolis, so I drove up the night before, and there were so Monica Miller, myself, and then two other people. And we met at Monica Miller's house and drove that morning. We kind of went over a plan the night before. There was another person there who kind of like had called the facility to make an appointment. She wasn't planning on getting arrested, but she was kind of going in to like talk to the office manager or whatever to sign in to kind of divert the attention away. Um, I think there was when we got there, we were going to go in individually, and there was, I think, some like confusion and anxiety and maybe a little bit of delay from traffic. So it ended up being that we all went in at the same time and sat down with just whoever. So I remember I sat down with one of the men, um, and there was a man, like we went in as kind of a team. And so we sat down with a man that was there who was very, very angry. And um, he was very mad that we were talking to him, but like beyond that, he just seemed so angry. And it definitely did strike me. Like, I don't know. I mean, this is an abortion facility. They don't do other services. So clearly he's with a woman here. And like, what poor woman is with this guy who's just so aggressive um, and angry, what circumstances is she in right now? And is this an abortion that she's being coerced in? Like, is there any abuse here? Hard to say.
Mhm.
The staff quickly realized that we were obviously not supposed to be there, and so they ushered everyone out, and then we sat together like in the waiting room and sang hymns until the police got there. I was not the spokesperson because I was just kind of along for the ride to see what happened. So I didn't say much at that point, but yeah, it was uh, yeah, we just kind of sat there and prayed for the people in there, prayed for the lives that had been lost, and just offered our prayers for this place that had become, a place of death. So,
It's so powerful. And the thing about rescue that's so interesting to me is it does have its critics within the pro-life movement. But I think one of the things that's amazing about rescue is it's the concept of sidewalk counseling, right? So standing outside a place of death and offering women alternatives to abortion. And there are so many women that literally say, like, I'm waiting for a sign,
right, right.
waiting for someone to like tell me that this isn't right or for God to show me I should do something different. And then through sidewalk counseling or through a rescue, many women receive the sign and they say, like, oh, and it's of course not every woman. Like some women are going to be resistant and not open to hearing about the value of their child's life, but some
Yeah.
people are touched by it and some lives are saved through it. Were you made aware of any particular moms or babies that were like impacted by that rescue?
No, and I don't, I do know that so we did have a group of sidewalk counselors outside and prayer support. So there were people who were like talked to outside, but no, I'm not aware of anything. It's hard to know because we also don't know who had an appointment later that day and didn't show up.
Mhm.
Who was in there and decided against it. Like, what did they do when they left? So it's so hard. Like, you just have to kind of act. It's an act of trust, really, to just say, this is what we're doing, and the results are in God's hands.
It's so true. And I think it shows like for me personally, when I look at all the different people in the pro-life movement, like I do think it takes a level of absolutely incredible courage in the heart of a person who decides to engage in a rescue. When you're young, you don't know what your career future is going to be. You're still like building your
Mhm.
professional skills. So I think there's just more risk when you're young choosing to engage in a rescue than say being someone who's retired. Because if you're retired, you're not
Right.
worried about applying for a job or doing things in the future that could be impacted by taking part in a rescue. So I'm so grateful to God for you and the people that choose to participate in a rescue because even if it is just one, you just don't know what God is doing and how many lives he may be saving. And even the workers and the way that that's a testimony to them, like thinking about what you're giving up to be there. You're going to jail. You are gonna, have a criminal record as a result of what you're doing. And I think that's a testimony to them. Like they're getting paid and like that this is you sacrificing right in front of them for these babies. And I
Hmm.
think that is a testimony, even if they don't admit it. And I think it's something that can really like melt hearts of stone, even if we don't see it right away. So, yeah, such an amazing part of your story. So from there, you're part of this rescue. Um, Clearly you decided to keep being a part of the pro-life movement because I met you later, quite a while
Right.
after
Yeah.
this rescue. So what happened after the rescue, right? You're going to jail, I take it.
Yeah, we did go to jail. It was planned that we would be bailed out, so we were bailed out later that day. Um, yeah, what a weird jail experience. Because I was in jail with a theology professor, so like that's not really typical. And yeah, so we got bailed out and then um we went out to lunch, I think. Like it was kind of like, all right, like we want to see how this goes. They were kind of testing this new model of the Red Rose Rescue. Um, and so I think, we were just kind of waiting to see what would happen next because obviously we would have to wait for our court case, which was then, so we got arrested in September. I want to say or the actual like hearing and whatnot. We did not have to be at the courthouse until February. So we were just not really sure what they would even charge us with. So yeah, we just kind of waited.
Yeah, that waiting game is kind of strange because you're like, okay, well, am I going to jail for 2 days or a month or longer? Or,
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
it ended up being like we got out later that day.
so
So
they did not send you to like jail for a few days or anything like that.
no, and it was just like the county jail too. So it wasn't like I didn't go to like prison or something, where we were basically in holding cells and
Mhm.
then someone came and bailed us out, which had been previously planned.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. What do you feel like the impact was on you to be a part of the rescue? Do you think it was like transformative to you in any way, or do you feel like it affected the next steps you took?
Mm. Well, the actual rescue itself, I remember being very spiritual experience for me because I was actually the last one in the clinic. The three of my cohort, got dragged out because you practice passive resistance. So, they do have to drag you. And, I think the police officers, I felt horrible for them because I knew that none of them wanted to be there. None of them wanted to be doing that. Like, they're in such a between a rock and a hard space. So I totally understood like this much must just really suck for them. Um, Anyway, I think they were also quite tired by the time they came to me because the two men were, large guys. And then they had little Monica Miller, who's like a teeny tiny little lady. And then me, who's like an average size woman. And so um I think like so they grabbed me by like my shoulders. Um and like, so I was handcuffed behind my back and then they grabbed me by my shoulders and then like for me they didn't grab my feet, so I kind of dragged my feet as well. It felt so much like wow, like in some sense like I'm the last one here. This is so lonely, and I'm waiting for them to come back and get me. And we were singing Amazing Grace at the time, and I just remember like being really difficult to continue singing because I was just feeling all of a sudden all of these like emotions of like I'm abandoned here. Like I'm alone in this space of death. And then I'm kind of being taken to the slaughter, so to speak. And it felt not only for me like a very small glimpse of what the unborn child is facing, whether they realize it or not. But then also like Christ being crucified, of like being dragged. Like I literally had like this is so silly, but I had like big gashes on my feet from where I didn't think to like what to wear to that kind of an event. So I was wearing sandals and like my feet were totally dragged on the pavement the entire time. So like I had like cuts and stuff all over my feet. And it was like this small glimpse of like these wounds of Christ. Like, my shoulders are feeling so uncomfortable because they're like picking me up by my elbows and my shoulders are like really hunched over. And then I just remember they like kind of dragged me and they were very respectful. But I remember like getting into the police car and just weeping bitterly for a while because I just felt like, oh my gosh, like I just got this glimpse of the deep loneliness and like pain and sadness of like abortion and like of these children and of these women, and men who are facing like the pain of the aftermath and literally the emptiness in their body when their baby is taken from them. So, yeah, it was a very, very spiritual experience for me at the time. I remember being very deeply moved by that and just kind of embracing the suffering of it. As far as the next steps at like after the rescue, it was like a lot to kind of sit with and think about for a long time. Um, I still felt very convicted that God was calling me to the pro-life movement post-college, and I think I was like a sophomore, I want to say at the time. So I think it just kind of re-emphasized that for me. Um, that, whatever that looked like, I didn't know if that would mean more rescues or something else. But I definitely knew that I was going to continue on the path of going at least full time into the pro-life movement.
Mm. That experience you had is just so powerful because it's true. It's so horrifying what the unborn child goes through. They are abandoned. It doesn't, the idea did not originate with me. Maybe it was Dr. Miller, I'm not even sure, but it is kind of this idea that the unborn child, when they're being destroyed in abortion, is an orphan. Like
Right,
they have been
absolutely.
abandoned by everyone, including their own parents, offered up to the abortionist. And it's just so troubling
Mhm.
what the unborn experience, especially when you consider that that happens 3,000 times a day in America
Yeah.
on the global scale. Like it's very hard to measure because not all abortions are recorded in statistics, but like 1 to 2 billion abortions is like the global number, which is absolutely unfathomable. But when you think about those babies, being abandoned in that way and not even their own parents are making any attempt to protect them, but are actually offering them up to the abortionist. Like it's just so troubling. And I'm in a weird way, I'm glad you had that experience because I think it helps us to remember to enter into and try to understand the suffering of the people we're trying to serve. Um, I've noticed the people that tend to do like longer term pro-life work and who are very like bought into the mission of the pro-life movement itself. Not necessarily just like one organization, but when you look at the broader pro-life movement, like say
Mhm.
your aunts, right? Like they're out there and they're separate counseling on their own free time. They're not necessarily with an organization. They're, engaging in these rescues. Like what makes them so bought into the cause itself? It's like you understand the suffering that
Mhm.
these children are going through on a really deep level. And so that's really amazing how, even though I'm sure it was very painful to process what them were like on a level, because obviously we don't know how
Right,
the
yeah.
extreme of like the suffering they're going through, we can't even fully comprehend. But even just sharing in their suffering a little bit is, I think, part of what drives us to really take sacrificial action for the unborn. And so, did you say you were a sophomore in college at this point? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so where were you going to school? You're probably going back to study after this.
Yeah, yeah, it was like a Saturday. Or no, it would have been like a Friday or whatever, and I was back in school on Monday. So,
Yeah. Wow.
I was like not really sure, is this is gonna come up in a background check when I get a job, but well, we'll see what happens. Yeah, I mean, life just kind of went back like I think also I went with people who had done rescues before. I was the
Mhm.
only one that hadn't been involved in something like that. And so in some ways for them, like it was normal. I don't know, like obviously they know that it's not like a normal activity that you do on a Friday, but like it wasn't new to them. Like I remember going home and Monica Miller's husband was there, or home like to her house rather. And so her husband was there just kind of like chatting with us. Like he was a teacher, he's a theology teacher at the time at least it was, and it was like grading papers at the kitchen table and we were just talking about the rescues. Like this is so odd. But life just kind of went back to, it continued. So we went on.
hmm Yeah. So, okay, where are you going to school at this point, and what were you majoring in and why?
Yeah, so I was at Indiana University of Indianapolis, and I was majoring in philanthropic studies. So it's kind of the theoretical side of nonprofit management. We learned a lot about like giving and volunteering, and why people do that. There was an element of fundraising, organizational leadership. It encompassed a lot of things, and so my goal was. I felt like having been a missionary for years, like I think I could do this. Like I really do think that I could be in leadership in a pro-life organization. I really do think I could do this, but I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So I'd really like to have some more practical knowledge. Like I did take a number of classes on nonprofit management as well. So like accounting and fundraising and writing letters and things like that. So there were a lot of different things to prepare me for leadership in whatever organization I was in.
Yeah, I really admire that too, because one thing I have noticed in the pro-life movement, like since having my own experiences, one thing I've come to a conclusion of my own is like if we want to end abortion, we have to have healthy pro-life organizations. Because
Right.
if we like mistreat the workers, sooner or later there are not any workers left. And when
Right.
people are damaged by the pro-life movement, even if they're really bought in and they care about the unborn, they're not going to engage as much in that work if they feel damaged by it. So I admire that here you are, this really young leader, right? You're passionate, you've been a part of this rescue. I think some people make a mistake at kind of this part in their journey where they go, I want to be part of this. And then they sometimes try to jump in a way that they're not prepared for. And
Mhm.
instead, you said, hey, I need more information. I need more training. I want to understand better how to do this well. So I've always really admired that about you, Abby. Is like, I feel like you always have had like very much a mindset of like building yourself and growing and like, let's learn something new. But then you also do it in a way that's like supportive of the people around you. And so that's a really neat thing that you did. That right there, God was laying it on your heart, like, no, it's time to study. It's time to learn. It's time to,
Right. Well,
add
to
to.
be fair, I did have a year where I jumped right in and I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I was an intern for an organization and I ended up having a lot of responsibilities by the end of my time there. And although I could see that like developing, I just like there's, a certain point that I was like, I don't really know where to go from here.
Mhm.
So it did seem like the time to do that. Yeah, that God kind of laid that in. But it was hard. I think in some ways though, that study lent itself to maybe not quite a total apathy. Obviously, I literally did a rescue in college, but I think there were points that I was like, not there was a pro-life group at my school. They were not great, and I did talk to them about, getting involved in their club, and it was just not, I don't know, they had really specific things they wanted to do, and it didn't really make sense to me, but so there was like it almost felt like, okay, I just feel so far removed, and I know that the purpose of this is for later pro-life movement work, but right now it feels like just a little bit I don't know, like
Far away.
not as engaging. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of people who want to do pro-life leadership of some kind face a season like that eventually. Like not all of them. Some people do go straight in full time and then they never look back. But there are plenty of people that they want to go to school. Even like if you think about the people at like, say, for example, the Charlotte Loisier Institute, they're like pro-life
mhm.
scholars. They went to school for like 8 years, 12 years to like finish whatever very niche field of study they have so that we could use it for the pro-life movement. Like people who study like fetal pain or they study the reasons women have abortions, like Dr. Michael New, for example, who does like research and statistics around abortion. So there are a bunch of people kind of in that boat, right, where they're like kind of catapulted into a long time of study. So looking back at your own journey, you had to take these, 4 years because that's where God had you was to like put you in these 4 years of study. What would you say to those other pro-life advocates who, for whatever reason, if they want the same degree you have, whether they're studying, philanthropy and organizational leadership, or if they're studying biology, they're becoming a doctor, you know what I mean? They're going to use these other specific fields of study for the pro-life movement. How would you encourage them to, stay engaged and keep growing their convictions to fight for the unborn while they're in school and they're not working full time for the cause?
Mm, that's a good question because I feel like no matter where we're at, we can always be working for life, in whatever capacity that looks like. I mean, prayer is obviously a big, big one. Um, Keeping the first thing first, if that makes sense, like really like I would say, from a point of view from someone from faith, like, the pro-life movement is not a vocation, it's a calling. So no matter what, like we're always following God's will for that. Like it's, you know what I mean? And so ultimately, if you are in school or getting a certification or getting training for something or whatever, like we're always doing that for the glory of God and like being attentive to his prompting and like his will. We're always needing to be discerning of like what God has for us because, we can even idolize being in the pro-life movement too. So we have to be mindful of that. Um, I would say, I don't know, gosh, I feel like a terrible example because did I even stay engaged? That's not true. Um, I don't know. I'd say, if your college especially has a group, being actively engaged in that, that wasn't a huge option for me, but I know so many, especially here, in Michigan, there's a lot of groups in Michigan to get involved in, but that is true elsewhere, or start your own thing. And like, whether that be like using the resources that your college has to learn more about, um, really anything engaging in the pro-life movement. There's so many things that you could do. But I think just being attentive to like the promptings of the Holy Spirit, what he really has for you, because it's when we're not tapped into that's where like the apathy comes from. That's where the kind of like disengagement comes from. So just I really like being a person of spirit of prayer, that is huge. Probably the most important thing for sure.
That's a great answer. I think knowing God really does drive us to become better advocates because when you consider that it's part of the nature of God to be an advocate, that God is the greatest defender of the unborn, then when we grow our relationship with God and we're, like reading scripture and we're growing our prayer life, that it does contribute to who we are as like who we're becoming as a person. Like God's transforming us and he's helping us become more like him. And it also helps us to be healthier in how we approach the pro-life movement because you're right. Sometimes people idolize it. And then that's where unhealthy things can creep in, where you have to start asking, you know, if your relationship with the movement is healthy or not. Because if people are approaching the pro-life cause, but they can kind of sense in themselves, there's tons of fear, there's lots of insecurity, they're always comparing themselves to everybody else in the movement, like stuff like that can like make you someone very difficult to work with or someone that's accidentally damaging people along the way. So I appreciate that you emphasize like it's important to grow your walk with God and to like even like to check in with yourself. Something I always really admired about you, Abby, is I feel like you were always like encouraging people like to take good care of your mental health too, right? To like, go to therapy if you need to do that. Because a healthy leader who's willing to do that, to admit like, oh, we need to work on ourselves, not just tell other people to change, but we need to work on ourselves, look inside too. Like, those leaders are really amazing to work for. And I say that because I got to work for you and you were always the kind of person like I never noticed any personal issue with your sustainable. Like I was just like, you're just the kind of person to own anything. Just like, oh, I'm gonna go work on that. I'm gonna go deal with that. You weren't the kind of person to like shift your issues to like onto someone else and say, oh, I'm gonna blame them, So healthy leadership in the pro-life movement, it does. It takes a strong relationship with God, but also like that willingness to like work on our because we all have personal stuff from our childhoods and all of that. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that perspective. So going back to your story, you're in college. So at some point you graduate, right? So you get your degree. What happens from there when you get your degree? Is it in philanthropic studies? Is that what you said?
Right. Yeah. So before I graduated, I had a friend I had worked with in the pro-life movement, and she later went on to work for, more deeply closer to home. So I remember reaching out to her and I was like, hey, does your organization have any internships? And so I started interning in, gosh, like the summer of 2018. And then I ended up graduating December of 2019. So I was offered a full-time job before I graduated, signed that job contract, and then started full-time fundraising for my position, and then finished that up mid-January and started full time doing my work. So I worked in as the director of community engagement. I was doing fundraising, not a ton of marketing at the time, but that did later shift. Um, yeah, so I like as soon as I graduated, I was kind of getting ready to move to Michigan and amping myself up for that and kind of the next chapter. So yeah.
Yeah. Somewhere along that journey. I don't know what year it was, but I met you eventually. And it
Yeah,
was
I went, I don't know, maybe I went to the March for Life that year. So that was actually the beginning of 2020.
okay.
I don't
I
know
feel
if
like
you
I
were
was
with
there.
us that time. I think you might have been, but
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah. I just always had loved, like, I don't know, getting to know you. You were someone where, like, you carried your leadership in a really unique way. Like, you were just always very approachable and very kind because I don't know what people's experiences are with the pro-life movement, right? As they listen to this podcast, like, maybe you know a bunch of people who are pro-life, maybe you know nobody who's in pro-life leadership. And something I've noticed engaging with different pro-life leaders is some people like want to be worshipped, which is not healthy, right? Like, it's kind of like some narcissism in there. And so I noticed about you, I was like, you just very authentic and very kind. And so I was like, I feel like I was always trying to find Abby, like, let me go talk to Abby. Abby's great. And so, but I did not know at all that I would work for you because I was very
Well,
busy.
you were definitely not about it at the time.
No, I was not. I think you were trying to convince me. And I was like, no, 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 no. I was working very hard developing like my healthcare training. And I was like, I'm not doing this. Like, I like helping with the mission when I
Right.
can in my free time. But I was like, I'm not going to do that. So,
And to
uh,
be fair, like there is a need for that. Like it's not everyone is called to be in the pro-life movement full time. And I think there can be some pressure from people that do work full time in the movement to get everybody they know to like quit their jobs and whatnot. And there are seasons of life. There are like also people in life, so we gotta have someone that writes the check, so to speak, because we can't all be fundraised missionaries. And there are also people that need to like be pro-life in their careers. You worked in healthcare. My husband also works in healthcare. There are so many opportunities to engage in the pro-life movement in whatever its form, like right in front of you. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be hesitant to jump into the pro-life movement full time. So.
For sure. And I think I saw too, like you and your coworkers there. I was like, oh my goodness, like this takes a lot of sacrifice. You know what I mean? So I wasn't like, oh, this looks like it's easy and perfect every day. I'm like, this is gonna be
Yeah,
really, really hard if I decide to do this.
right.
So yeah, you were here and you had this position. What were some of your day-to-day responsibilities as the director of development?
I did a lot of talking to our supporters and, writing a lot of letters. I did a lot of different campaigns throughout the year. We had an annual fundraising banquet that I and my boss, who was the executive director, we worked on that pretty heavily together, but that was a huge project of mine. 2020 was such a weird year to start because I moved to Michigan like 2 days before the governor shut the state down. So it was very different. And then we also did that year, we had to kind of pivot a lot of our work. And so some of my work, although it didn't necessarily relate to development specifically, was outreach because, every school was shut down and we worked with students. And so we had to do a lot of pivoting to, street outreach where people could see us with large signs and things like that. We were outside, masked, whatever, following the rules as best we could, but also still trying to find ways to engage. Um, yeah, so it was a lot of different like fundraising tasks, but then we also had an element of the like program tasks within, engaging in outreach and talking to people.
Hmm. Yeah, 2020 was such a difficult year to
Kind of a
try to
weird year to start.
yes, it really is. And one of the elements of your job is that you were doing these outreaches, right? You're trying to educate people on the unborn and the fact that abortion is a human rights violation. So, one thing you specifically did, I'm not sure if this started in 2020 or not, but eventually you were doing outreach with abortion victim photography. I'd love to talk to you about that just a little because I think it is still, unfortunately, kind of a point of controversy in the pro-life movement. And I'd be curious about your experience with it. Do you feel that it was more effective in helping to change people's minds? If other people are maybe considering doing abortion victim photography outreach, what would you say to them? Like, were there things about the tactics you use that you thought might be helpful to others?
Um, Yeah, that I would say, statistically speaking, I think the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform did like a study on people's response to abortion victim photography, and overwhelmingly it made people feel more negatively about abortion. So, I mean, we know that it is an effective tool to help people not like abortion, which is kind of what we're all aiming for. So we don't want anyone to be okay with this. I think I would say, abortion victim photography, yeah, I do agree with using it. Obviously, we did, but I think there's also a level that you need to be very delicate with the fact that number one, you're standing next to a picture of a child that has been like aborted and is deceased. So you need to have the right attitude with this is a pretty serious thing. Like I can't be chatting and laughing and whatever, because that just comes off so poorly to a pro-choice person. But then also, for some people, for many people, they have really believed the lies of the pro-abortion movement, that this is a clump of cells, that this doesn't matter, that, this is not a big deal. And so for many people, they're seeing an abortion victim for the first time because it's not swept behind like a clinic door, so to speak. And so you have to be really gentle with the fact that like this is, you're showing people what death looks like. And many, many people do not want to see what that looks like. Even further than that, you also are going to be encountering people that have had abortions or have assisted in abortions or have encouraged them. And you're a mirror back to them of what that action was, and so there is a level of ministry of, talking to people on the street. You're going to encounter people that don't care, that are going to laugh at you, that are going to yell at you, but then also people that are going to be so affected by what they're seeing because they're acknowledging maybe for the first time, oh wow, like this is what that was. And everyone has been gaslighting them for however long. They're like, no, it didn't matter. You did a good thing. That was for your career. That was for your whatever. You did an amazing thing and you should be proud of this and blah blah blah. And then you're kind of this ugly voice that's like, no, this is the truth. And even if it is true, that does not mean it's not hard to hear. So, I think being ready for that, um, just realizing like there's so much of an emotional ministry in abortion victim photography. You're not just there to speak the truth, we're also speaking mercy, and those two can never be divorced
Mhm.
because that's, where things break down. So
So true.
being able to like remain calm, being able to, be kind and compassionate and to show people really like, that they're not alone and that Christ forgives them and wants to, that they can forgive themselves, but then also um, bringing people into action in whatever that looks like in their daily life for stopping those abortions from happening even further. Um, yeah, so and I think too, you know, it's easy when you're standing next to an abortion victim to get really angry at the people around you because maybe they're apathetic in general. Maybe they're swearing at you. Maybe um they're mocking you even. And it's what you're standing next to, but they don't want to know, if that makes sense. Like as I said earlier, we're not fighting ignorance, we're fighting apathy. And I think that the pro-choice movement has unfortunately done a very good job of creating just a chasm of apathy. So we just have to be there almost like a prayerful presence too for the sake of these unborn children that like even, as you were saying earlier, like these orphans, that it's said in scripture, even if your mother should forget you, I will never forget you. And so in a sense, like we're being spiritual mothers and fathers to these children, in advocating for them. And so we just have to keep that in the forefront of our minds that no matter what the response is around us, that we, are there. That being said, I feel like, um, yeah, abortion victim photography can be extremely effective because I have seen people like completely change when we would we would let people walk up to us and we would ask them, what do you think about abortion, etc., and kind of start with that really neutral statement. And, people could go on like, oh, I think abortion's fine, whatever. It's great. It's the women's right, whatever. And then, if you have later in this conversation, like, have you ever seen what an abortion victim looks like? And for many people, the answer is no. And like, this is what an abortion victim looks like. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, it's easy to hide behind these words of choice and empowerment and whatever, but it's a very different thing when those words have a face,
Mhm.
and the face is really ugly. You know, yeah, it kind of makes them believe that. So I've absolutely seen abortion victim photography change people's minds on the spot to being totally fine with abortion to being absolutely 100% against abortion. So yeah, I think abortion victim photography is a very powerful tool, a tool that we need to use very responsibly and respectfully.
Yeah. Very true. And I appreciate how you share that because you're right that like mercy is a big part of it. Like, when you're talking to someone and they're very triggered or they find it hard to see the body of an unborn child, it doesn't mean the tactic is wrong. It
Right.
means that they're very touched by it for one
Mm.
reason or other. Maybe they had an abortion, their mom did. Like there's something here that's connecting to their story. And yeah, you always model that very well. Because I would go with you to these outreaches and it's just difficult to engage people that way. And yeah, to see Robbie would come with you, your husband, right? So then you and Robbie be together doing pro-life
Pretty good
outreaches.
at it.
You're like, Robbie, look what you signed up for. You got a pro-life activist for a wife.
I think he was
Um,
here for it.
I know, I know. I bet. See, Robbie is he an ethicist now? Because I know he was going to become one. That's what he was.
No, he's a nurse manager.
Oh, wow. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
he's a nurse manager at a hospital close by, and he's still on his way, kind of trying to work up the ladder, so to speak. The ethicist dream is definitely not dead, but you
Okay.
know, yeah,
It's down the ways a little
down
bit,
the
but yeah.
path. Yeah, I think he's
Yeah.
hoping to like get into more of a director role in the
Mhm.
future, and so he's trying to get management experience, and then is trying to move into mission integration and ethics. Yes, that's the
Yeah,
word.
that's amazing. Yeah, it totally makes sense that you guys ended up together, right? Because you're like this passionate activist, obviously concerned about ethics because your whole job is like, hey, we're actually not being ethical children. And then you end up with Robbie Gilmore. So you guys are such a cool pro-life couple. I do admire it. Okay, so we talked a little bit about abortion victim photography. One thing I wanted to pick your brain about a little bit before you go, because I know that you have some cute little kids to get back to who are probably looking for you, is I wanted to talk to you a little bit about fundraising because I don't know if our listeners know, but fundraising is a big part of the pro-life movement. There are not enough financial resources going towards the pro-life movement. The pro-abortion movement has very, very, very substantial financial resources and it can be extremely difficult on so many different levels, like organizational budgets, but also like politics, like a lot of different ways. The pro-abortion movement has way more financial capacity than we do. Um, and money isn't the biggest thing, right? Because like God can still defeat abortion, even if it looks like our foe has tons of money. So it's not the only thing, but it is an important part though of the pro-life movement because people have to eat, and these pro-life missionaries, you have to make money. So when I was starting to be involved with pro-life work, at the time I just kind of knew Abby as a friend. I was not working for you yet. And I mentioned to you that, hey, I'm becoming an intern in Washington, D.C. I'm a volunteer intern. And I was like, Abby, here's my plan. I'm going to go work 7 shifts in a row in the hospital, and I am
Forgot
going
about it.
to save my overtime money. And then that'll do it. I'll just pay my rent that way because, I was going to just rent a little apartment in Washington, D.C. area. Um, and I was like, "Oh, it'll work out. It'll be, hard but great." And she was like, "Oh my word, you're gonna kill yourself trying to work that many hours." And so you convinced me one day when I came over to your apartment, and I was like, maybe I would do a little fundraising. And to be honest, I came over to talk to you that day, and I was like, I am never fundraising. No, that sounds like begging for money. That is like the worst thing I could ever imagine doing. Like that is like me dropping my dignity at the floor. Like, no, thank you. I'm not doing it. So anyway, I come over because I'm like, well, this is what Abby does. Like, she can tell me like her spiel about, how to fundraise, and then I'll just silently disagree with her because I'm not going to do it. Um, and then you just challenge me. You're like, no, make a list of people that you feel share your convictions and see if you can call to talk to them to like basically make a business proposal in a way to them to make an ask to see if they're open to supporting you. And I can, I think you told me that day that I looked like I was so shocked that you would suggest this that it looked like that you told me to kill a dog or something. You know what I mean? Like that's what you were saying. It's like I was so shocked that I just had a very visceral reaction. I was like, oh my word, Abby, like, how could you tell me to raise money? That's insane. But I appreciated how you helped me to get a different perspective. Um, there's an entire book called The God Ask by, I think, Stephen Shadrach is his name, but that was kind of what you had read. Is that his name? Is that the right name? I don't know.
I think it's Steve Shadrach, yeah.
Steve, okay. And so obviously because of the work you were engaging in, you do not think that fundraising is the equivalent of begging, and you didn't think that my perspective was so great. Like maybe I should try something other than overtime to save money for a pro-life mission. And so, um, can you help me understand what your kind of like your spiritual basis and your philosophical basis was that you brought to fundraising? Because there probably are people listening into this podcast that had the same mindset I had, where like I want to go, maybe be an intern for a volunteer intern or whatever, and you have to raise enough money to cover rent and for groceries and stuff. What would you tell someone as they're beginning, maybe the very start of their fundraising journey? Because something I really admire about you, Abby, is like it's not when I had to report to you later, right? Like I had to meet with you every week about my fundraising when I started working for a different organization and that internship was over. I eventually worked for you. I would meet with you every week and we had this like fundraising group where we get on Zoom together and we talk about our fundraising progress. You just have a different philosophy that even some pro-life people do not have. Like you're just very supportive, you're very relational, and you really care about people's challenges that they face when they fundraise. You're not the kind of person to constantly give people a kick in the pants because that mindset can get kind of scary for someone who's young and new and you've never tried it before. So when I learned from you about fundraising, I became more supported and more cared for, and I really admire that. So I'd love if you'd share with people, yeah, how can you start that really scary journey of fundraising?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, Read the God Ask would be a good a good thing. Great resource of a book. Definitely a lot in there. I think, yeah, my pro-life journey started out at an organization that literally didn't turn the heat on during the winter because it was too expensive to pay the electric bill. And so we actually survived off of space heaters the entire winter. And I lived on site, and so I spent the entire winter miserably cold because I was freezing. There was mold in the bathroom that they were probably going to do zero things about. And I just remember the amount of newsletter or like email, like emergency, we're at, $35 in our bank account and we've got this to do, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, this is not a sustainable way to engage really in anything because you're constantly like in a deficit, and that's just not a way to live really anyone's life. Like, can you imagine doing that in your own personal life, in your family? Like, if my husband and I tried to like assert our or tried to like grow our family, but we were also like stressed out that we, weren't sure we were going to pay our groceries that week, or, we were going to be evicted or something like that, like constantly, like would we ever be able to grow as a family? You know, no, absolutely not, because we would be constantly staying in this lower level of survival.
Mhm.
And that's just not a way to live as a person, let alone as an organization. So I think that gave me a perspective of like, well, that was wrong. But my boss was at the time kind of opposed to, he's like, well, I'm not interested in fundraising, but if you want to do it, you do whatever you want. And I was like, I literally started this internship like a few months ago. I don't like, this is not my, like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. So
Mhm.
I think although everyone hates talking about money and fundraising and things, like I saw the other side of what that looks like and just kind of the way that that really caused the organization to suffer. And no one wants to stay around when that's the case, because like winters are cold in the Midwest and I would love central heating on. That seems like pretty baseline. Anyway, so that being said, I think, I saw that and then I was like, all right, well, I am not doing that. And I also feel like people think, if you're a missionary, you need to be poor. And I'm not saying in any way that I think people need to be like overtly like crazy wealthy, but I do feel like it should be pretty baseline that you can feed your family and, take care of your basic needs and whatnot. And because if you're stressed about that survival, how are you going to be thriving in your role saving the unborn? So, um, yeah, my perspective, I think, is that number one, fundraising is necessary to do literally anything because you would never look at a business with no venture capital or, any sort of investor or anything like that and be like, wow, you guys are going to do great in your business. Like you need money to do that. My husband works for a hospital, and my goodness, the amount of money that is going in and out of that hospital is insane. Especially now that he's in management, they're starting um, a new outpatient clinic that he's overseeing, and he's buying tens of thousands of dollars, if not at this point hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment for this facility.
Mhm.
And you know what? When you're having a stroke and you need to go somewhere, you go somewhere with the good stuff because they're going to be the people that can save your lives because they have the state-of-the-art equipment and they have all of the materials they need to save your life. And in the same way, we need to have the same perspective that like we need to have quality and we need to have good, wholesome things, in our organizations. We need to have big missions, and sometimes those take big budgets.
Mhm.
But what is the risk? Just in the same way in my husband's unit, people will and can die. The same is true for the pro-life movement. So, I think we need to have a mission in mind rather than a budget in mind because, God is not a God of like numbers and cents, dollars and cents. He's a God of mission. And that's what he puts in our hearts. Also, when we fundraise, we're bringing other people into that mission. And I'm sure you experienced this in your own personal fundraising. I experienced this in mine. I had an aunt, for example, she'd been married in a family, so clearly not in the same way, but she had been really involved in um, like the women's liberation movement, as she called it, back in the 70s and 80s and such. And she had actually driven women to get abortions. And she had later had a big conversion, had repented of those actions, but it really carried that with her. And she was so excited to get involved in my team. I didn't even do a fundraising ask because she told me even before I did, like she was so excited to be there because she was giving money to this ministry, and in some small way for her, she was able to kind of redeem the actions that she had taken earlier in life, and that she could in partnering with me, seek to build life rather than to take it. And so we're allowing people to come into that to like, to engage in good things, but also like, okay, I'm a stay-at-home mom now. I don't work full-time in the pro-life movement anymore. I have two young toddlers and I have one on the way. So I'm not getting, yeah, I'm not getting arrested anymore because that would probably be really imprudent for me. But I can still do good things through other people who are called to do that, who are in a season of life where they can engage in whatever God has for them. And so we're allowing people to, carry out their own desires of ending abortion, which is a beautiful thing. Like this isn't just a ministry of one, this is a ministry of many. Because the abortion industry has no problem hiring who knows how many people. Why can't we also have the same? Um,
So true. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I really do feel like fundraising is much deeper than just money. And I think when we lose sight of that, then like we're also limiting kind of what God can do. Because when we invite people on our team to support our organizations or us personally or whatever, they're praying for us, which we desperately need because this is a massive spiritual battle. They're engaging with us, but they're also bringing their own, ideas and selves to the table, which is just a gift because we need all the help we can get.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's definitely a lot I could go on for a long time, but I feel like, um, in any other business model or in any other industry, we wouldn't even blink our eyes um, to think that money would be involved, but for whatever reason, people are so hesitant to not only talk about money, but to ask for it in the pro-life movement. But like if we're gonna end abortion, then this is how it's got to be done. So
Yeah, it's true. Gotta have a mission mindset there. I like how you said that. Like, don't be thinking about your budget. You gotta think bigger, think with a mission, don't just be like, oh, okay, we're gonna just restrict, don't spend more than $10. Yeah, like it's we have this mission and God's going to provide. There was
Mhm.
a verse that I would think of a lot when I was doing my fundraising, and it was there's a passage in the book of Psalms that says like God owns the cattle on a thousand hills, right? And cattle doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean very much to us because we all don't even want cattle. But back then, like cattle was a sign of wealth. Like it's just the idea that, God owns all the wealth. He owns the cattle on a thousand hills. So God has all the resources and he's our provider. And so he sees us through those times of fundraising. And I would love to talk to you a little bit about this transition to focusing full time on being a mom, because I want to ask you some controversial questions. Because because I think it's important. There are a lot of young women in the pro-life movement, and many of them do wrestle with the questions of they want to be open to dating, they'd like to get married, they want to have kids. But then some of them may even struggle with the feeling of maybe I need to not have kids in the name of ministry. Maybe I need to not change my work schedule because abortion is so pressing that I can't step away from that and have kids. So, would you be willing to walk me through how you marry Robbie, you have children? How did you handle that? Because I mean, abortion is a crisis, and you did end up, deciding to change your work arrangement so that you could be more focused on your kids. And I love and admire that so much because the work of a mom is extremely pro-life work. Because if all of us had moms that were not present for us in the name of doing work, we would not turn out very well because we all need the love and the nurturing and the attachment with our mom to be okay as humans, to be healthily developed humans. And so it's very, very pro-life work to be a mom. But I would love to hear about your journey into changing your work schedule.
Yeah. Well, I will say I was probably one of those women at one point that, no, I wasn't. I was for sure one of those women that felt a lot of guilt, because in a sense it felt like I was sacrificing like millions or thousands of children for like a few, and I just felt like, gosh, like how could I abandon these children? And I really wrestled with that question. I also I also used to think I can't marry a man that's not like an activist who's like full time in the pro-life movement because why would I do that? Gross, icky. And I just really wrestled with those questions. Because I was just like, well, I'm like so deep into this now. Like, how could I ever marry someone that's not also in deep at this? Um, I should say my husband is insanely pro-life. He's very open to life, both, just like as a father, but also like he's one of 12 too. So he's, seen what openness to life looks like in a family in a really particular way. But yeah, I remember actually when we first met and were, friends or whatever, the first text message I ever sent to him with this sounds so dumb, but I was like, you have an acceptable amount of pro-life content on your Facebook page. And
You passed the
I was
Abby
like,
test.
yes. And like, but internally I was like, oh my gosh, he's so pro-life. I'm so into it. Like this is awesome. Um, and my husband is unique because in so many ways, I've seen how like so he worked in the ICU. He was a COVID nurse in the ICU, and then he was in the cath lab in the interventional radiology. So he is literally seeing people like the amount of people that he saw die during COVID was insane. And for so many people, because of the restrictions, like he was the only one there in person.
Mhm.
And so my husband understood life and death in a way that I could never. I've never seen a person die, but my husband has been there for so many people, literally holding their hand, holding for a time. He was the one holding the iPad, for family members to be able to say goodbye to their family members, and so he has a really particular heart for life and for the respect for life in general. I think that obviously that's like particularly unique. I don't think you need to find, you know, specifically that to get married to, but I think I guess my point is I saw how, like, although he wasn't working for a, pro-life anti-abortion organization, like my husband was living the values of respect for life in a
Mhm.
very deep, deep way. And he was obviously very supportive of my work. And so when we got married, he became a volunteer as he was able, he learned how to like lead outreaches. My husband is very good at talking to people. His one downside is that he's a man, so people immediately don't think that he has anything worth saying about abortion, but like for the most part, like he's just very good at talking to people. So, I saw that in him as well. And just, I think there is a level we need people that are quietly living out their daily lives, quietly, following God's will for their lives and like supporting the pro-life movement, whatever that looks like. So that's really him. Um, when we got pregnant with my first son, I knew that I wasn't going to be like working full time. Even from like a practical level, it just like would never have worked to figure out like childcare. It would just have been so complicated. But even beyond that, like I just knew that I don't know, he was my baby and I wanted to stay with him, and that was what I felt really convicted by. And so yeah, when he was born, I switched to being kind of a consultant for fundraising. And I did that for a few times a week. So I still like coached people in their fundraising, but then when my second son was born, I was like, there is literally no way I'm going to be able to do this because I'm trying to like do this during nap times and whatever. And now I have two very needy, very close together children. So I did decide, at that point, it just made more sense to take a step back. Now, that being said, when I was pregnant, I was still doing outreach. So when I was pregnant with my first son, I was still working full time and doing outreach. And I have a distinctive memory of being 10 weeks pregnant and standing next to the sign with a picture of a 10-week-old aborted child on it. And I had just had an ultrasound the week before. And I remember talking to a high school student about abortion, and I actually had a very good conversation with him at the time. And I remember telling him, I just saw a child this age on an ultrasound like a few days ago. And
Mhm.
let me tell you, he was so active. Like, you don't really think about children like running, like, swimming around, like, and
Mhm.
flailing their arms and legs. Like, they're so active, but they're so little, you don't feel them, and I was able to really like speak into the humanity of what fetal development looked like. And I think that that was really impactful because I knew it so much deeper, and I think throughout my first pregnancy, that was also during that pregnancy, Roe v. Wade was struck down by the Supreme Court because of the Dobbs decision. And so that was huge of like, whoa, I was like 24 weeks pregnant at the time. And now, like for the first time, I was watching my unborn child have like legal protection, which then
Mhm.
immediately changed to Michigan. But anyway, um, but it was just, it was crazy, like what a time to have your child. Um, I think that, I knew so much more intimately, like, so I'm 29 weeks pregnant with my third baby right now, and he's been kicking the whole time I've been on this call. Like I know so intimately like the development of a child, but then also just how much they need their mothers. I like saw that, and I think that that really deepened my understanding of how painful abortion is because I know the bond of a mother and a baby. Obviously I have a mother myself, so like I've experienced it from a child's perspective. Um, but just seeing like when my first son was born, like my husband tried so hard to like help me sleep and give me like rest when he was able to. And my son just did not care about him at all. He just didn't care.
Yeah, I don't want
And
dad.
he was like, I remember one time Robbie like had been walking and he done skin to skin and he gone up and down the stairs for like an hour. And he came into the room and he's like, honey, I'm so sorry, but I think he needs you. And I was like,
Oh,
I remember groggily waking up and I was like, what? And as soon as my son heard my voice, he stopped crying.
oh,
And it was like, as soon as he heard me, he's like, my safety net is here. I'm okay. and it's like just to know like the depth of the connection between that baby and you is just like it makes abortion so much more poignant because you're like, wow, like they are so defenseless, and they're so vulnerable. I think in a way it has allowed me to grieve deeper for not only those children, but also their parents, because children are such a gift and they're hard, and motherhood is not for the faint of heart. But they bring so much life to you and joy and purpose and so many other things. And so I feel so devastated for any woman that doesn't get to experience that, whether that be who knows what happened to her to get to that point, it's not for me to say, but she, for whatever reason, she's foregoing that gift, and it's just what a sad thing. As far as the like guilt of um I wouldn't say leaving the pro-life movement, but like taking a step back, I think in a sense I can see how this period of time is the way that it was, when I was in college, and it's like kind of a learning period. I'm doing what God is calling me to do. And that's what I said earlier is like the pro-life movement is not a vocation, it's a calling. Like a vocation, is marriage, in my practice of Catholicism, that might look like religious life or priesthood as well, but you can't marry the pro-life movement. And some are called to be, single lay people for that. So that's not to say that that's not. And my aunt is one of those people. But at the end of the day, like we have to follow God's, call for our vocation, and then our calling within that. So some women are called to stay in the pro-life movement. And like Lila Rose is a great example. She's like kicking butt and taking names, and she has 3 children now, and for whatever reason, God has, you know, paved the way for her. So that's awesome. And I'm so grateful for that. But that wasn't the call for me. So I had to follow what God had for my life.
For
Um,
sure. And something I really admire about Lila Rose is like I listened to her podcast, and something she has talked about is like how as a mom, like she's not going to sacrifice her attachment with her children for her work.
Mhm.
So like she's had the psychoanalyst Erica Komisar on, and they've talked about
Yes,
how, like,
I've
isn't
listened to
Erica
her.
amazing? She's talked about how
Phenomenal. Great book too.
so
Yeah.
amazing. I've read that book. It's called Being There. And, you know, Lila has talked about how like it's not worth it to like to drop your child off at daycare and to damage their
Yeah.
capacity for attachment. So she's very mindful that yes, she carries out this amazing work, but they've hired a nanny who's which when they look at like childhood attachment and like childcare, not all children do not do well in all like childcare arrangements. So that's actually something I really admire about Lila is like, yeah, she's like such a force in the pro-life
Mhm.
movement, but she did not sacrifice her children's capacity for healthy attachment in the name of her work. Because, like, I do think there is a lie of the feminist movement that kids don't need their mom. They have no need for their mom. If they don't care if you're gone. The truth is, though, that children do grieve the absence of their mom. And that's actually something I really admire about Lila is like, even when I saw her interviewing Erica, um, there is something really challenging. It's like trying to find the right balance between like work and motherhood and being able to acknowledge that for children when their mom is absent, it is a loss to them. I think is so important because the feminist movement says like, no, 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 like ignore the child's need, like just send them to daycare, like don't care about what they're going through. And I think Lila is an amazing example of like, if you are going to work, like make sure that it's mindful, make sure you're paying attention, like to your child's cues and if they're too overwhelmed or if the absence was too much, so that we check in on them. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed her out as an example because she's a great example of not ignoring your kids in the name of your mission.
Right. Well, and I think even to that, like to think that they aren't your mission because
Right.
those children are your mission, like for
Yeah.
more than anything outside of your home. If you're, and I think that that's really honestly the sign of a good versus a dysfunctional leader is
Mhm.
if you look at their home life, their family life, if it's going poorly, like I don't know. I mean, obviously there are circumstances, so I'm not going to say in every in every single circumstance this is true because there are things without out of their control. But for the most part, if their family's falling apart, how in the world are they supposed to be engaging in this ministry? Because this is like the biggest spiritual battle you could ever have. Marriage is a spiritual battle. And if God, like if Satan has taken some hold in your marriage, it will affect every aspect of your life.
Right.
And, to think that your children are a distraction is a lie from Satan
Mhm.
because he doesn't want us to like he does not want us to continue life. He doesn't want us to be open to life. He
Mhm.
wants to find anything he can do, to very well-meaning people. And again, I don't necessarily think that every single person in the world is called to marriage and called to
Mhm.
motherhood. So I'm not saying that like it's one and done, but if it is a fear-based thing, that like I can't do this because it's distracting from my ministry, then you've missed the point entirely,
Right.
because my children have opened up the world for me in a way that I could never have seen anything before. They've given us a sense of purpose and a sense of intention in a way, that we live our lives. And, it's just, yeah, you're missing the point if that's what you think. Which
For
I know is
sure.
hard because I was there once before, totally.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully, I have like the most dad husband I could ever have found. It's like, all right, I'm ready
Yeah.
to buy our minivan at any time.
Oh my word, that is so funny.
So
Like, do
it's
you want
like,
this as like your honeymoon gift? Here, let's get a money minivan, you know?
yeah, we did actually get a minivan a year ago, and he was so excited.
Oh my goodness.
Like the fulfillment of all my desires. He's like ready for our 12 passenger van.
That's so
Like,
funny.
oh my gosh.
Like, Robbie, it's gonna take a couple years.
Yeah, it's like, okay. And so I'm so grateful that like he never had that mindset because
Yeah.
he is just so like steeped in the truth of God's design for family and like but I think if I had like been with someone who had that mindset, like, I could totally understand how I would have fallen into the trap of like, I don't know, let's delay having kids for a really long time, or, like let's even limit our family size from this, you know, and I'm hesitant to say anything because discernment of your family is very, very deeply personal. So like it is very easy for me to speak to other people's families, but I think the point is like not closing yourself off to life. That's just something that would never have been the case for my husband because and like you marry him knowing that. It's like this is what I'm
Right.
committing to.
This man comes with a
It's
lot of
like
kids.
it's not
That's
like
so
I was
funny.
like surprised, it's like this is who he is. So,
Right.
and I'm grateful because I feel like that did a lot of healing in my heart.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
That's so beautiful. So I want to ask you kind of a point blank question that is controversial. So brace yourself, listeners. I know it's hard to kind of go to the depths of these questions sometimes, but it's important. Like when you have a lot of ministry minded women, something some women have decided to do is to like intentionally contracept while married in the name of promoting the pro-life cause. So what would you say about like the ethics of that? Because like, right, a person would probably claim like, I need to not have children because I have taken on an intense job and I care so much about the unborn and this mission needs me so much that I cannot be open in my marriage to having kids. What would you say to that?
well, I think. My perspective is really specific because, I come from a Catholic background and we are always against using birth control. So, insofar as like we will never be in a position where we will be 100% like barring the marital act from procreation. So, that's just for the perspective that's my perspective in general. That being said, again, it's very difficult for me to unilaterally make a claim because I don't know that person's health history or like what their marriage is going through or etc. And there are some legitimate times where it is very reasonable to, if we sorry, let me back up. If we are in a period of time where we have discerned that, maybe delaying having children is the best course of action, then we would abstain from having sex during our fertile period. So that's, there. There have been times in marriage where that has been the case. For example, after my second was born, I had a lot of health issues, and getting pregnant was really not um, in the best interest of my health. I was just just really recovering from that, and so there was a period of time where we did abstain from sex during that time, and so it was hard. Don't get me wrong, I was not a huge fan, but because of the circumstances, it did not make sense. And so, sex is always connected to being open to procreation, and that's like a huge piece. So I can't speak to like, if you were using birth control in whatever form, like obviously I would never think that that would be acceptable, because that's just, I don't believe in doing so. That being said, I'm hesitant to say much because I really don't, it can be very, hmm, that's like between you and your pastor and God. And I would say, if anything, you should probably always be having like, because we're not using birth control, my husband and I are always in conversation. Are we open, like, not are we open, but what is the next step of our family look like? Obviously, I'm pregnant right now, so like we're not really having those kinds of conversations because there's not relevant. We're having the baby. But I do think, we're always in a conversation of where are we at? What does the discernment look like? And I think that you should be, no matter what space of life you're in with your spouse, you should be in that kind of a conversation. And if that is an absolutely closed door, we're not open to life, I would be really hesitant to say that that's a good move because, first of all, it's not really like God is the author of life. You're not. So, that's just not going to happen. But then at the same time, like, assess, like, why and like, again, is this a discernment out of fear? Is this like, are there significant health issues? I have heard of so many stories of women who've had so many, good gracious, women's health is another topic for another time, but so many health things that are very legitimate. And so it's hard to say, if someone is kind of not really wanting to get into that, so they're saying like, oh, for the sake of my career or whatever. If you really truly have like a career that is not open to life, and you don't feel that you could have a baby while working in that career, I would ask you if that career is really worth it then. Because the pro-life movement would not be pro-life if they truly said you cannot do this job if you have children. Like, they're not a pro-life organization. And maybe that is a point blank way of saying it, but that is the truth. Because how in the world are we going to tell women who are in college or who are working jobs where they do say that they're in abusive relationships, they're in poverty, in whatever they are, how are we going to tell them, no matter what the circumstances, you can choose life if we are not doing that for our own employees? I mean, that's like just the most insanely like hypocritical thing you could ever say. So I would say maybe reassess, is this job really important to me? And maybe it is a really important job, but does that mean that that is actually important for you and your family? I feel like, yeah, God does desire us to be open to life. He does desire for us to be fruitful and multiply. So as a woman and, as a husband, like, we're always discerning that openness and what God has in front of us, because as I said, like, children are a gift, and we need to embrace them as such and not as like a distraction from the mission, because they are the mission.
I love that answer. And that's so true. The children are not a distraction from the work. Like they are the work. I feel like C.S. Lewis said something like that. And, I think it's true as well that say you're married and you think you're going to not have children in the name of ministry, which I've heard not only in the pro-life movement, but also like in people doing like Protestant Christians I know who are like, oh, I do pro-life writing. So like, or not, sorry, not pro-life Christian writing. So I am not gonna have kids. Like I've heard people in all these different types of careers say this. And I think what's true though is like, if it really is about doing ministry and you're not supposed to have kids, then I do believe God will make you infertile. Like if you're genuinely not capable in your marriage and in your job of doing the mission God gave you, then I think God will actually not give you children if that's so like if it's going to interrupt it so badly, if it's going to really derail something, then God will just not give you a child in that situation. But I think sometimes the really difficult truth for us, especially as women, that I think can be very touched in a negative way by feminism, where we sometimes believe our only valuable contribution is at work and the time, the hours we clock and the paycheck we get. I think one of the ways it's impacted us very negatively is then we say this child will take me away though from the things that make me significant. And the truth is though, like we're all just someone's child. We're all just the child of God. And our significance is like, I bet your husband's a great example. Like, have you ever seen a great dad, like, just pick up their baby and just admire them, right? Like, the child actually didn't do anything for the dad. The child is making more work. The child needs their diaper change. The child needs you to spend money to go buy formula. Child needs you to go buy diapers. You know what I mean? Like, this is more work. But, like,
Mhm.
a great dad reminds us that we're all just someone's child. We literally make more work for God, but because God has to like work and take care of us, right? But he just values us as
Mhm.
his children. We're not just little worker bees. To him, we're just loved. And we don't
Mhm.
have to like clock a certain number of hours or get a certain number of years of experience to be significant in the pro-life movement or before God. Like we're just his child. And so it's not going to destroy your life to, to be open to life and
And I
to
think to your point of like what Erica Commissar, she has a thing about like your career will always be there for you when you come
yes.
back, but like your children can only have one life, and so I think about that of like I don't know, so this is my third son in a row. So I'm like, I don't know what these boys are going to be doing. I pray that it's something good and glorifying of God, but I don't know what they're going to be doing in their lives, but I do have some level of control on the kind of childhoods they have. Are they going to be advocates for the unborn? And we're really increasing the pro-life movement. Honestly, the pro-choice movement is going to die out. I mean, good gracious, no one's having babies. Like
Mhm.
they're not really helping themselves out there.
True.
Then meanwhile, you've got like the transit vans galore pulling up to your March for Life. You really think that in 100 years, like we're going to have very many pro-choice people left? Maybe converts to it, but not ones that are born into it, and meanwhile we have this massively growing pro-life movement. So, our children are a gift to us and but they only have one life, and I think I remember actually in when I was studying philanthropy, we read a book about Peter Singer, who's like an ethicist, and his whole thing is, do the most good for the most amount of people that you can. And I think on the surface, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds good. But then you find out more about him, and he's like pretty much abandoned his own children. And so it's like, okay, well, you can be this great philanthropist for literally these strangers, in other continents, but like your own kids are in need of you, you know? And if everyone would go home and love their family, like we wouldn't have abortion. You
True.
know what I mean? And so we really have to keep that in mind first. Like there's a kind of phrase called communio and missio. The communio is the communion with God, but also in our family. And then the missio is out into the world,
Mhm.
right? And if it's kind of an inhale and an exhale, I've heard it say. And if you're just always exhaling, there's no inhale, you'll die. You literally would die. So we always have to keep that balance of the inhale and the exhale.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Abby. And I'm really encouraged by your life and the way you've lived because I've seen you in different seasons. And I think because of different experiences I've had in workplaces and the pro-life movement and all this stuff, something I've started to realize is you really see a side of a person by working for them. And what I saw by reporting to you is just like this genuinely amazing person. I know you hate being complimented, so forgive me in advance, but I just really admire the person you are. Thank you for being just so genuine and for encouraging other people to grow as pro-life advocates, to grow their walk with God and to work on their mental health. Like people, when they do those things, like there's so much healing, you know what I mean? And so I'm really grateful for the way you've lived your life. I love the testimony you've shared today. I learned some things about you I didn't know before. But it's just amazing that I've gotten to meet you along this journey. And it's just, I think one of the most fun things about knowing you has been seeing you become a mom, like seeing you with little Sam, your first son. Oh my goodness, it's so fun. You have a beautiful family. And I'm just so excited to see all the ways God will continue to use you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Cassidy, and thanks for bringing me on here. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing.